for everybody who's watching who doesn't know Dame, why don't you tell the audience who you are and what you do?
Yeah, man, I'm Dame. I'm currently the founder of the Music Entrepreneur Club. What we do is we host weekly live sessions to help educate young creatives on the business. Most of them are independent artists, and knowing that there's so many different ways to set up a business, to position your business to be successful in the music industry. We just try to deliver the truth so that people can take what they need to set up their businesses the right way in order to try or to give them the best shot at having success in the music industry. So my background is I ran a label for about 8 years, pretty successful independent label. So I've managed artists. I currently work for, do some consulting for a music distribution company called Foundation Media. And then I currently manage some comedians. So, obviously not musicians, but doing a lot of the same things that I used to do for artists. So I'm still pretty active, working with creatives, and the Music Entrepreneur Club is a great platform for just artists to get the truth because there's a lot of bad information being shared. So we bring a lot of people to the table that have a lot of great experience, and we just try to raise the quality of conversations around the music industry.
So let's talk about your experience in the music industry. Like, how did you get into the industry, and how did you get into managing and starting a Funk Volume, the independent record label, which was pretty successful? How did you get there?
Yeah, it was really just, it was not something that I set out to do. I was working as a management consultant in 2008 after getting my MBA in 2007, and then got laid off. And just so happened at that time, my brother was going to college, and he said he wanted to drop out and do music because he was kind of frustrated with the college experience. Wasn't really too excited about anything he was working on. He felt he would be more excited doing music. So I decided to just kind of help him out as I was figuring out what my next steps were going to be. And then he had a friend of his named Hobson who was equally as frustrated, but in a different situation as he was signed to Ruthless Records at the time. So we decided to get together, just figure out this music stuff. And, just me from the business side, just starting to learn things and figure things out. And then them on the creative side, just, starting to consistently put out content and engage with fans. And, we just figured it out, from the bottom, and eventually built the label into a pretty successful independent label, signing more artists, signing some producers, touring all around the world, selling a bunch of merch, just doing what artists do to make a successful living. And then unfortunately it came to an end in 2015 when me and Hop butted heads in a pretty ridiculous fashion. But I learned a lot, and that's kind of what was a little bit of the inspiration for the MEC, which is still just a passion project. Just because I believe that artists need to understand the business so that there's less tension with business people. Because there's a lot of artists that don't really understand the business that they're in, and that's going to lead to a lot of conflict later on down the road once you start becoming more successful.
So for the artists who are just starting out, like, they're putting out the first single, the first EP, and they want to build a sustainable and successful brand. Like, what would you suggest, or what were your first, I guess, steps to telling an artist, like, hey, this is what you need to do from point A to point B? I know there's lots of ways, but what are your main topics, your main approaches to the game?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think first, I think you should just get really good at what you do. Just get as good as possible at creating music, developing a sound. I think that's where you should spend most of your time, in the early days, at really creating something that you think is going to resonate with the given audience. The other thing too is just kind of understanding the story that you want to tell, the brand that you want to have, and make sure that that's compelling. So when you have, messages, or when you're creating music, it's from a standpoint that's interesting, that the look is interesting, the feel is interesting. Um, and then just going back, when you start getting better at creating, I think it's easier to be consistent because being consistent is so important these days for anybody that's in the public space or that wants to do well on social media. If you don't develop your chops and they're not good at what you do, it's going to take longer to create. If you don't have a good understanding of your brand, you're going to be fumbling on what kind of content to put out there, how to engage with your fans. So I think a lot of artists just kind of rush and get out there. And I encourage artists just to put music out, but you're really going to have to focus in on developing your skill set and really having a good command of your story, before you really take a serious shot, because it's going to take a lot of content, not just music. But I think every artist figures out how they want to interact and engage with their fans. So it's more than music. Some come out with podcasts, some come out with different content series and things like that, because there's so much that we're all being bombarded with, and we have to stay in that stream. We have to stay in people's faces. You have to stay telling your story, so that people take an interest in what you're doing.
What are the main drivers that you see that are helping artists be successful in that space?
Well, I think the first thing is just what I just alluded to before, is just that consistency, that ability to just stay present, and to stay putting out quality content. I think if you're able to do that, you should be able to build some momentum. And then it's just, having an understanding of the business, having an understanding of where, the revenue is, and capitalizing or making sure you're capturing, those different revenue streams, whether it's, just straight from master royalties coming from your distributor, or it's publishing royalties, or you're getting into the sync game, or you're getting YouTube royalties, or making money from Facebook, or maybe you have an OnlyFans. Like, there's so many different revenue streams that once you have an audience you can capitalize on. You need to figure out what position yourself to collect everything that's owed to you, and then also figure out where it's best for you to focus, because every artist could have a different revenue mix. There's some artists that I know depend pretty much on merch. Like, everything they do is to drive merch, and they spend a lot of time like really honing in on the designs, keeping the designs fresh, making sure the inventory is managed well, make sure you're pricing everything accordingly. Like, they're really into merch, and that's kind of the heaviest. That's probably their business is heavily weighted towards merch. There's other artists where it's heavily weighted towards stream, so they're super focused on building that cult following that constantly streams their music, getting the benefits of playlists here and there. So it's really different. I think the artists that do well have a great understanding of their own business and how they do well, and have a strategy for how they move, because it could be different from somebody that's heavily weighted towards touring. And if that was the case for you, then you're probably really hurting right now, because there's no tours going on.
Right. So I know there's a lot of things going on right now, including this pandemic. So how do you pivot? If you're that one artist or that one band who relies on touring, like how do you pivot? Because I know a lot of artists are really struggling, and they're trying to find a way. I think there's opportunities out there, but they're having a hard time pivoting from touring to developing other streams of revenue, or going to other areas to where they could be successful.
Yeah, well, hopefully this is a wake up call, and it encourages artists to have more of a balanced revenue mix. So if you were heavily weighted towards one thing, maybe you're looking at your business a little differently now. It's like, okay, I need to diversify my revenue stream, so that, if something happens to one revenue stream, then, I'm winning over here, because with merch, you would think there's not a lot of merch being sold during the pandemic, but we've had record selling months, with the comedians that I've worked with, during this pandemic. And then I would also, encourage artists to, develop revenue streams outside of the music industry to further insulate your business or your livelihood, so that, if something does happen and again another revenue stream gets shut off, you're not as impacted by it, because you've made proper investments, even outside of the music industry. uh, I think that that's something that artists need to either learn themselves, or to have a team, or management, or a business manager that prepares them, prepares them for these times.
Right. So I know you have management experience. You know, you've built some of today's biggest independent brands or independent musicians help build their brands. So picking back off of that, how do you find the right people, or what type of people do you need for as an artist for your team to grow to be sustainable? In your opinion, or at least what is the one person or the that one accountant that you need to make sure everything is stable and they can reinvest and scale as they grow.
Yeah, I mean, I think early days when you're not really making much money, the people that are around you are probably people that are contributing to the content that's being made, right? So it's a videographer, maybe it's somebody that does graphic design, it's somebody that's contributing to the content that you're creating. So I think those are the people that are most crucial at first, that you develop great relationships with, because you may not find a manager for a while. You may not find a manager that makes sense and is willing and dedicated and will willing to go as hard as you're willing to go for your career. You may not find that early, so you might be a team of one. But the people that you need most immediately are the people that can help you create content. So producers, like I said, videographers, graphic designers. I think that's who most people need first because sometimes it takes a while before money starts coming in. When things do get tough to manage, or when you have a presence, I think managers, will start to reach out to you, or you'll start to meet people that might be interested in managing you, like when you've created enough momentum. I think it typically happens that way. I think eventually when you start making money, you're gonna want an accountant and make sure you're paying your taxes and saving and things like that. And then if any contracts get thrown your way, you're gonna want a lawyer to review those contracts. So, those are definitely the people that you'll find first. But like I said, the people in the beginning should be people that are contributing to the content that you're trying to create to get that initial momentum.
So I want to get back into the topic of merchandising because I know Funk Volume had was heavy on merchandising, and you said something that was really interesting to me. That you said with the communities that you're working with today during this pandemic, they've seen a growth in merchandising. So for the artists who are looking to get into merchandising, where do they start? Where do they start?
Well, lucky for them, it doesn't really take much money to start. You have dropship company or print on demand services like Printful and Printify, or I think there's Teespring. There's a bunch of them out there where, because when we started, we had to buy the shirts, have them in inventory, and then hope we sell through them. And we did. We definitely didn't hold on to too much inventory, but there's an inventory risk if you buy too many shirts, if you buy the wrong sizes, you buy the wrong colors. You don't want to be sit with that inventory. So now, artists have access to companies like Printful, which is print on demand. So you really just upload your design and you can make as many versions of the product available as possible because nothing gets made until it's purchased. So, it's purchased. It basically latches. If you have a Shopify store, you can use Printful in conjunction with Shopify, and somebody buys a shirt, the shirt gets made once it gets bought, and then basically split the commission on the shirt. So a shirt might cost you like $14 or something like that, and then you make whatever profit you layer on top of that as the price, or you decide the price. So you could say it's 25 and you make $11. You can say it's 30 and you'd make $16. So really, I've seen artists build a career, with very limited investments. Like I've seen artists like create a buzz just on Instagram using their phones, like rapping into their phones, doing freestyle stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, they built up a brand. Maybe there's a tagline that gets associated with the content they're putting out. And once they build that following, people know that tagline, they like what you're doing. Boom, they got a Shopify store up, and they got Printful integrated, and they're selling merch for probably an investment of like $50. So that's amazing. That's amazing that young creatives have this option, to sell merch and to have a full store with like so many different products available. Because on Printful, you can put like mugs up there, towels. Like there's so many different things, so many different products that you can put your brand on, and it doesn't cost you anything. And then if you start selling, you start making money. So, I mean, I think that's great. I wish we would have had that option, when we started in 2008.
So let's get into the tactics and strategies. I know text messaging marketing is huge. I think it's underutilized. I know you use it with MEC, and I think that could be a driver, for example, to drive sales to your merchandise. So, what successes have you seen with your text messaging marketing platform?
Yeah, so I've used text marketing for quite some time. I'm a fan of just artists owning the communication with their fans. So whether that's, I think text marketing is the strongest. It has the highest open rates. But not everybody's willing to give you their phone number. So, if email addresses works for you, or you should be doing a combination of the two. I think you should be using some form of text marketing, some form of email marketing, and every artist is going to have a different strategy on how they use text marketing, because given that more people are safeguard their phone numbers, you kind of have to really have an incentive for people to give you their number. So with the comedians that I work with, a lot of fans want to be alerted when a new sketch drops. So, we inform people to text into their numbers so we can store their numbers. And, using the platform I use called Fan Connect, we send out sketches as soon as they drop via text, so to make sure that like the most loyal fans definitely get an alert and don't miss any of the sketches that get dropped.
So, how important is content marketing tied into text messaging marketing? Because they can piggyback off of each other. Like, you can drop a video and you can send out text, but how do you see it evolving within the next 3 to 5 years? Do you see people or the industry hopping on the bandwagon? Because I think, like I said, it's underutilized. Or do you see that it's just going to just stay pretty stagnant?
Well, I hope that more people do it, but as more people start to use text marketing, I think the more people are going to use it in the wrong way, and people are going to safeguard their numbers even more, because as more artists or celebrities mismanage their phone list, they send out messages that people didn't want, or they use it in a way that the fans didn't sign up for. I think people are going to safeguard their numbers even more. So I think it's going to be important, for people to use it, but it's going to be important for people to use it the right way, and to develop that trust, and to deliver messages that your fans want. So you might, because on Fan Connect, you're able to like segment your audience. So if you have a new podcast and you say text podcast to my number, and that's how I create a separate list for everybody that wants a podcast. But that's a list, within my contacts, one list. If I'm sending out the podcast, I don't send it out to the entire list, because everybody that signed up for my text messages didn't want the podcast, but this subsection of my list wanted the podcast. So just make sure you send the text only to the people that signed up for the podcast. Don't send messages to people that didn't want the message for that given subject, if that makes
Right,
any.
right.
So I think it's going to be important. It's going to be important. It's going to be powerful, but you got to be really careful on how you use text messaging, or you're going to get a lot of people unsubscribing from your list, and you're going to get a lot of people upset with you, and then they might go to social media and complain and get more people upset with you. You just have to be careful.
Right. So let's get into music licensing. I know there has been a complete shift in the last 5 to 7 years. A lot of songwriters, a lot of producers who used to uh, focus mainly on the royalties off of the performance royalties. The whole atmosphere has changed to sync. What are your thoughts on that, and what do you think the strategies are for upcoming songwriters who might not get the mechanicals because the mechanicals are dried up? Performances have changed, and really sync is the main bread and butter. What are your thoughts on that, and how can upcoming songwriters or producers adjust that shift, or even just regular recording artists or singer songwriters?
Yeah, I mean the sync game from what I've seen is a relationship game. There definitely are some platforms where anybody can log on and like submit for syncs. Like it's just kind of open. And right now, to be honest, I'm drawing a blank on those specific game with those specific names. I think Songtrader has some element of that. There's a number of platforms where and I don't know how successful people have been on those platforms actually getting those placements. From what I've seen, most it's developing relationships with sync licensing companies, or it's developing relationships directly with music supervisors that need music. Um, it's about having great quality music, and it's music that kind of fits that would fit more theatrical. If it's movies, it's more theatrical releases. I mean, there's so many different types of music that's being placed these days because there's so much content being created. There's so many different platforms, so there's more music being needed. Um, and we've had several people on the MEC to talk about music licensing. I think the most recent one was a cat from Netflix, and he was just talking about the sound and why like a Kanye gets. I mean, Kanye gets more placements because he's Kanye, but it's also how big his songs sound because those fit like trailers and intros and outros to like big movies. So I think once you have an understanding of your sound, it's finding those content where it matches up. We're finding those music supervisors that are looking for that type of music. But at the end of the day, I think it's more relationship based than anything. So it's developing those relationships, with these sync licensing companies. If you're with if you have a publishing deal, oftentimes, the placements get landed through your publishing deal. But it's relationship based, and just good quality music.
Would you say that location matters? Because if you're in LA, you are within a 50-mile radius of almost everybody that you need to talk to that can get you to, you know, get you opportunities as opposed to somebody in the middle of nowhere, Kansas or wherever. It might be a little bit difficult. I know we have the internet, but I, from your perspective, do you think location matters?
Um, I mean, obviously, it's more effective to try to have face-to-face meetings with folks, but I've seen people really, do really well over the internet or just through Zoom. And to be honest, especially these days, like even if you're in LA, you're probably still gonna do a Zoom call. So, I think it's less important. I think it's just you can build a lot of solid relationships online. Like I've built some really solid relationships online. So I don't think it's gonna stop. It'll stop you. But if you do live in LA, there's more events. If it's not during COVID, there's more events and there's more opportunities to network. But it's not a lost cause if you don't live in LA.
Right. So let's shift the conversation to Spotify because I know you have your opinion about streaming, and you said so many times in throughout the years that you believe that artists can really build uh, a sustainable income stream from streaming, even though there's a lots of people like, hey, this is hard, this is, they come up with, I don't know if they're excuses, but they have a hard time believing that streaming is viable. So what would you say to the people, to the uh, again, the emerging uh, musicians and music entrepreneurs coming up, because that's who we are targeting? What would you say to them about streaming? Like, how can you build a sustainable brand through music streaming? Because music is the main
Yeah.
product.
And this is not even an opinion. This is just fact. Like I know a lot of artists that make a living from streaming alone. Talking about that revenue mix earlier, their revenue mix is heavily weighted towards streaming. Like I know these artists, Foundation sends out checks to these artists, like they're real checks. So it's not an opinion when I say you can make a living off streaming alone. Like I know artists that do it. But these artists have a strong fan base that streams their music over and over again, and they're not really relying on playlists. They're relying on their fans to support what they're doing, and they feed their fans new music on a consistent basis. So that I mean, it's not easy to do. It's definitely not easy, but it's possible. But a career in music is not easy. So if you came into this expecting anything to be easy, then then I don't know what to tell you. But it's very possible an artist are winning. I think when you hear a lot of complaints about streaming, it's either the artists that haven't been able to build that fan base, or it's the artist that's signed to a major record label that's in a shitty deal, and they're only receiving a fraction of the streaming income, if they've recouped at all. So I think that's where you hear a lot of the complaints about streaming. And of course I want artists to get paid more, but I wouldn't count on Spotify or the streaming rates getting raised anytime soon. So you're going to have to put in the work to build that fan base, so that you can start to drive your streaming metrics up.
I think funding and getting the resources are important. And when I say getting the resources, that doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, you go to a bank, or so, you have $1 million in you have $1 million to spend from. But I think that it's finding somebody who, or a group of people who you can work off of and build something that's strong, that you can put out to the network, to your fan base. So how strong is collaboration? How important is collaboration? And is it worth it? And if it's worth it, how can you maximize the potential relationships that you build to start building momentum?
I think collaboration is crucial. I think cross promotion is crucial. I think more artists need to be working with, other artists in their same lane, share each other's fan base, share knowledge, share resources, build together. I mean, it's already ridiculously difficult to pursue a career in music, but if you're doing this by yourself, it makes it that much harder. So, collaborating with people, building good relationships with people, doing solid business with one another. And then on the social media side, like I said, like really pushing each other, tagging each other, sharing each other's fan base. That needs to be done more. I don't think independent artists do that enough. I think, there's a lot of ego involved when it comes to that kind of stuff, or they just don't realize how effective that can be. I mean, artists have, even if you have a small fan base, like you have a lot of influence with your fan base. So if you co-sign another artist, and you introduce that artist to your fans, that's a strong cosign, and I think your fans, if the other artist's music is dope, is going to become a fan of that artist. That's one of the most effective, or probably maybe the most effective, thing you can do in terms of getting new fans is getting another artist who has a few diehard fans to co-sign what you're doing. So that collaboration, that cross promotion, it's not done enough in the independent space, and people should be reaching out to each other to work and just create better music too. I think a lot oftentimes you get some of the best music when collaborating because you're pushing each other to be the best that you can do. So yeah, man, super important.
So, is there any collaboration you've done within the music industry that's has been very successful, or would you like to indulge of any projects that you've done as such that anybody who's watching this or listens to this can learn from?
Yeah, well, currently with the comedians that I work with, we're in talks with other comedians and managers to try to, work on some content together. Because even in the comedy space, people have large platforms. I mean, one of the guys I work with, his Facebook is 2.5 million, his YouTube is 1.1 million. But I think, it's finding the other comedians if we want to. I mean, he's going to continue growing because he's good at what he does. But if we want to accelerate that growth, let's start working with other comedians that have platforms and really, put the fuel on the fire and probably create new content. There's no reason why, we shouldn't be working with some of the other top independent comedians, if they respect each other's craft, and just grow faster, have a wider audience to release our content to. So that we're working on, getting other comedians in the sketches. And the way he came up already was collaborative. I mean, he works with a crew of cats that have their own channels. They shoot each other's stuff, they appear in each other's stuff. So he has a crew of cats that kind of came up together, and that's what they did. They collaborated with one another. But now it's like, okay, outside of the crew, like what are other artists or comedians that we want to work with to accelerate our growth and get more eyeballs?
Right. That's a beautiful thing. So, just to wrap up this interview here, I just want to ask you what is your main, or give me three main things that you would tell to any artist, whether they're big or small, about growing their music, their brand as a manager or you know as a record label owner. What are those three main things that you would tell to the world?
Well, shoot, man, I'm gonna go back to what I mentioned at the beginning. Because I don't think artists really realize, how how consistently present you have to be, in telling your story, and just like, are you ready to kind of continue to be in this stream of social media? So I would say work on your craft, get very good at your craft, and and that's making music. That's probably, in these days it's creating content for social media. All that stuff has to be faster because we need more, and it needs to be quality. So it's getting better at creating content. It's really understanding like who you are and the story that you're trying to tell. Because once you understand that, it's so much easier to create content, right? If I know my lane is about I make music, but I also cook and I love sports, and that's what I want to tell the audience, right? So that's what my content is about, right? So maybe there's a cooking content series, or maybe you're mashing up the latest highlights from the NBA and putting your music over it, and that's a series that you put up, and maybe that gets shared by House of Highlights at some point. But really having a good understanding of your brand and the messaging that you're trying to share, so that coming up with content is easy, right? Like the MEC, we're about music business education. We have a podcast, we have a weekly live session. I don't ever struggle for what to post on the MEC page because we constantly have guests. So I'm pulling highlights from that. We constantly have a podcast every week. I'm pulling content from that. Like I'm never waking up thinking like, oh shit, what should I post today to keep to keep my socials active. So so yeah, so getting better at your content, learning how to create faster content, being consistent with it, and I would say learning the business. Really learning the business so that you can position yourself for success, and you just understand how to move and understand how to collect, the money that once it's generated or where it's at, how to collect it.
Well, thank you, Dame. And this is the Music Biz Club. And stay for the next episode.